It makes sense in this high-tech world to look for the latest and greatest of whatever is on the market. The fastest computer, the biggest memory, the sharpest screen. Although sometimes the latest is not necessarily the greatest. The recent Samsung Galaxy Note 7 was a flameout. We don't want that one. And even the iPhone 7 is doubtful, no headphone jack. And when it comes to operating systems, did we really need Windows 10? I suppose we should be grateful to have so many choices, so long as our upgrades are still compatible with everything else in our lives. And what's the latest and greatest in home design? It's what you find. It's what you seek. If it's you doing the constructing and designing and building instead of a manufacturer, you can start to take real ownership. Imagine building a house from the ground up, designing floor plans, different levels, open space kitchens with islands for dining or cozy corner tables with a wall bench or bar stool. You get to decide. You can choose the latest and greatest in home design, and at the very least, be sure that your home is warm in the winter and cool in the summer, and keeps the rain out with a solid roof overhead. I suppose there was a little bit of that kind of sheer new home enthusiasm going on with God and Haggai and God's long-exiled people brought safely back to Jerusalem. The Israelites had suffered a devastating war, imprisonment, exile, and nearly 50 years of enslavement in Babylon, modern-day Iraq. They finally returned, but to a Jerusalem destroyed. It would be a big rebuild. And what God wanted, and was impatient to see begin, was the ground-up rebuilding of God's temple in the center of Jerusalem. They wasted no time at first. The year they arrived back from exile, the Israelites immediately laid the foundation for a new and improved temple. It would be the latest and greatest in 6th century BCE architecture. They were so grateful to God for guiding them safely home, they poured every ounce of energy into the big rebuild. But then, they got distracted. They got dreamy-eyed about garden villas and paneled houses, and they turned their attention to building their own homes and gardens. They forgot about the house of the Lord, the temple on the hill. They forgot to be grateful for the gifts they had received from God, their return from exile, their freedom, and their lives. For the next 17 years, as they built up their own estates, Haggai writes, they planted much, but harvested little. They had food to eat, but never enough to be satisfied. Clothes to wear, but never were warm. Jobs to do, but never enough money to spend. Why so? Asked the Lord, frustrated, rhetoric. Because my house lies in ruins, while all of you hurry off to your own. Then the people became worried, because what God was telling them was true. The so recently rescued people of God had completely abandoned their efforts to reconstruct the temple. They had misplaced their priorities. They had put themselves ahead of God, focusing more on building their own houses than on establishing the center of their faith life, the gathering place for the worship of God. Let us not be like the Israelites, lest we leave church with God's call on our lives ringing in our ears and then forget it by the time we reach our cars in the parking lot. Haggai spoke God's word, saying, "This is why you will never achieve what your grandparents once had, why your gardens grow poorly, your stomachs growl, and your wages are lost." The people took note. The evidence was all right there. They had lost their center. They had forgotten God, and worse, they had forgotten to be thankful. They had forgotten what abundance God can bring if only we would trust in God. That's when God gave them even more. God sent them Haggai to shore them up, to get them back on task. His message was simple: take courage and get to work. It was a big rebuild. Many of the people had been born in exile. They did not know the former temple. They did not know what possibilities awaited them. So Haggai asked them a series of questions about the temple that began like this. Who is left among you who remembers the former glory of this house? And then he asked, how does it look to you now? When I look around this church and our campus, with the new and improved social center and the new attention to beautify our grounds, I would say it looks pretty good. But that's because we are one of the growing churches in the Presbyterian Church USA. We are one of the exceptional few mainline churches in the area, in the nation, whose numbers are slowly growing, our diversity increasing, even our pledge base improving. Of course, our church had a much larger congregation once. Some say 2,000 members. I never saw our former glory, but some of you have. How does it look to you now? Differences for sure, but what stayed the same? The warmth of God's presence, the welcome from other congregants, the connection to the sacred through sermon and song. Think for a minute. How was it then? And how does it look to you now? This past week, I was reading through the U.S. Congregational Life Survey conducted by our denomination in 2012. The survey revealed the traits that were unique to growing churches like ours, as opposed to traditional churches that were stuck or dwindling in their membership numbers. Demographic changes certainly have an impact on all churches, but where there is a core congregation, or even a remnant of exiles who can be encouraged back to church, the growing churches exhibited several strengths, many of which we share. The part of the study of most interest to me was the observation that in growing churches, worshipers say they experience God's presence, a sense of joy, awe, or mystery, and spontaneity in worship. Spirit-filled churches grow. The study revealed that the number one reason for congregational growth was hospitality to visitors. The number two reason was having a new pastor. And the number three reason for growth was having a good pastor, not necessarily a new one. Growing churches also took more steps to integrate new worshipers into the community. Growing churches invite new members to take part in congregational events, to join a small group or a committee, or to participate in special courses. Growing churches offer their facilities to outside groups, like we do. They provide community service programs like emergency relief, counseling, support, programs for children, health programs, and performances in arts and music. Growing churches also maintain a website. They have pastors who send letters to recent visitors, email or call them by phone. Growing churches reach out to non-members through encouraging congregants to invite friends to church, by mailing newsletters to neighbors and holding local community events. And significantly, members of growing churches have a strong sense of belonging. A majority of worshipers at growing churches report that they have close friends at church. On Thursday night at Junior Club, fellowship time for our 3rd to 6th graders, One sixth grader introduced me to her two friends that she had invited to join her for the evening from school. Immediately, another of her regular junior club classmates complained, "Hey, I'm your friend too. Just because you didn't have to invite me to come and I come anyway, I'm still your friend." Point taken. There were 4 close friends in junior club Thursday night, and that was just on one side of one table. The survey had some tough teaching as well. Certain observations surprised me, areas where growing churches did not set the pace or separate themselves from the pack. First, for both growing churches and traditional churches, the amount of giving per individual member was about the same, just under $2,000 per member each year. As a percentage of income, both growing churches and traditional churches showed on average that about half of regular worshipers give at least 5% of their income to the church. That's not too bad for Presbyterians, but it's hard on growing churches, especially because of the factoid that followed it, namely this: growing churches place higher demands on their staff. As a result of increased staff needs at growing churches, more of the financial resources of those churches are needed to pay staff salaries. In fact, in most larger churches of 650 members or greater, like ours, more than half the church's revenue goes to pay for personnel. So if members of growing churches don't give more money to their church than other churches do, yet they make more demands on the staff for programming and ministry, we face a cash shortfall. And this is where Haggai would say, "Take courage, but get to work." In order to build up our house, take care of our staff, and provide the many services that our church is so known for and makes so vibrant, we are asking for everyone who worships here to make a financial pledge to support our church. Your promise to make a financial contribution to the church in 2017. In fact, I invite you to join me today as I place my pledge in the offering plate. If you have not pledged yet, or even ever before, then I urge you to join me today. Here's why. This church is a non-profit corporation, unlike most any other. We don't just do good. We do good in the name of God. We teach our children not only moral ethics, but Christian ethics. We not only provide moral support, but we also provide prayer, presence, and participation in the lives of our members when sought out and needed the most. This is where the difference lies. This is where your church matters and why your participation in our pledge drive is so essential. Each one of you is Christ's witness in the world, carrying out God's mission. But we must maintain a community with a central place from which to worship, a professional staff to carry us through, and mission dollars to help us help others around the world. We are stronger together, and we do church as a community, not on our own. Theologically, we can think of these priorities as concentric circles emanating outward, first from Christ in the center, then the church congregation, then the community, and finally reaching out to the world. No one of us can be church alone. We must act in community, and for that, we need a common fund. It was this refocusing of God in the center, of rebuilding a worshiping community that Haggai spoke of to the exhausted remnant of Israel, the people returned from exile and struggling to start a new life back home. And that brings us to the one central reason why people in growing churches like ours give their precious resources to the church. Gratitude. Gratitude. We give our money to this church out of gratitude to God. Like the exiled Israelites come home, we have a lot to be thankful for. All of us do. Just think about it. Families and friends, babies, inexplicable blessings, miraculous recoveries, gracious second chances, inclusion at last, forgiveness once and for all. Thanks be to God. For the Lord is so gracious and so good, so willing to share in abundance and give without counting how many times, that the Lord even promised to provide the people with the resources they would need to make the big rebuild happen. I will shake the world free of its treasure, for all treasure is mine, says the Lord, and I will fill this house with splendor. This house will be greater than it ever was. In this place I will give prosperity, says the Lord. All that you treasure comes from me. Haggai was the last of the prophets of Israel. In fact, his career as a prophet lasted only 3 months. But he was effective like a relief pitcher at the close of a vital game. Within 5 years of his urging the people to take courage and get to work, the people of Israel had completely rebuilt the temple and adorned it with silver and gold. They worshiped God together and with gratitude. They prospered and they gave thanks to God. 600 years later, a new prophetic voice could be heard, crying alone in the wilderness, proclaiming the day of the Lord. John the Baptist, cousin of Jesus, he knew the Messiah was near. Christ would come, whose forgiveness would free us, whose compassion would heal us, whose dying would pardon us, and whose rising up again would save us forever. This same Christ, risen and alive, invites us now to the table as friends. Come, taste and see, food that satisfies, forgiveness given, grace restored, lives rebuilt, the bread, the cup, the Christ.